subsidiary called De Novo. The government of Trinidad and Tobago is encouraging these investments to ensure that all small pools and I dare say strand gas fields are exploited at this time. It is our intention to extract every molecule of gas that is available to us, bring it to shore, bring it to plant, and take it to market. That is the government's position. The principals of Proman at their global corporate headquarters met and discussed their current and future investments in Trinidad and Tobago and highlighted how these investment decisions for Trinidad and Tobago fit into the group's expansion plans. The government of Trinidad and Tobago encourages this. Proman's executive happily includes many citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, some of whom made technical and business presentations to the Trinidad and Tobago delegation and held valuable discussions with the team in Zurich, Switzerland, and Düsseldorf, Germany. I want to make it quite clear, contrary to what is being put out by the opposition, we did not go to Europe to visit any plant. And we don't need the opposition to tell us that Proman has plants in Trinidad and Tobago, especially an opposition that didn't even know that the government had a shareholding in the LNG plant. We didn't go to visit any plants. We went to hold discussions about programs and possibilities for investment and technical considerations for developments on the road ahead. So we met with the engineering and the technical and the business and the shipping teams in Europe. That's how we went there, not to visit any plants. At their corporate headquarters in Zurich, the executives provided an overview of the group's global operations, which are spread over 11 countries. And I want to make a point here to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Proman, this major international company in petrochemicals, is really a Trinidad and Tobago based company. But it has grown to 11 countries abroad. And what happened on this trip is that they brought their people to meet with us, and discussions surrounded future exploration and production of natural gas to provide feedstock for the plants in Trinidad and Tobago, new developments and investments they're making in shipping, and the possibility and potential, with the encouragement of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, for Trinidad and Tobago to be using methanol, for Proman to be using methanol as a fuel for ocean-going vessels, and for Trinidad and Tobago to be a major refueling point on the global transportation routes. There were discussions for opportunities for Trinidad and Tobago to access financing for new projects, including new technologies and financing of green energy in the energy sector, and the possibility of investments in alternative energy generation and energy storage. These are areas of potential involvement and growth, expansion and diversification forward, where the government is encouraging private sector major investments using cutting-edge technologies and new decisions for the months and years ahead. The government of Trinidad and Tobago keenly encourages these developments as important parts of our economic expansion and elements of diversification. At Proman's Düsseldorf offices in Germany, their executives from Zurich, Germany, from Zurich, Switzerland, from Germany, Italy, and Portugal made presentations focused on projects being executed at several locations globally. These presentations focused on Proman's experience across the full value chain, from project development and finance, natural gas production, petrochemical production and marketing, logistics, and distribution. All of these of great interest to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. There was discussion about the opportunity to deploy some of these resources in Trinidad and Tobago in future investments that would maintain and even expand our involvement in the wider energy sector. The Trinidad and Tobago ministerial delegation had informative and satisfying discussions with Proman's principals, David and Joseph Cassidy, and executives, many of whom are Trinidad and Tobago nationals. Some of them you might know: Ricardo Mohammed, Managing Director of Group Operations; Anita Gajada, Managing Director, Marketing, Logistics and Shipping; Brian Ramsamir, Managing Director of De Novo. These were all part of the Proman team that sat down with us for 2 days in Europe. With respect to BP, you would know that Minister Young had been leading a team of experts in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as our hired experts from North America and Europe, to hold discussions with the main people in the LNG business in Trinidad and Tobago, with a view to restructuring the arrangements for producing and benefiting from LNG in the marketplace. Those principles are BP and Shell, and of course, it involves our national gas company. The Trinidad and Tobago delegation traveled to London in the United Kingdom to meet with the BP leadership at their global headquarters at St. James Square. BP is the largest producer of natural gas in Trinidad and Tobago and is critical to our energy sector, while Shell is the largest shareholder by its recent acquisitions, largest shareholder in the LNG business. We met with Mr. Bernard Looney, who is the Chief Executive Officer of BP, Anya Isabel Dodzarath, who is the Executive Vice President, Gas and Low Carbon Energy, and David Campbell, who recently was in Trinidad and Tobago as the incoming country president for BPTT operations. The discussions surrounded BP's operations in Trinidad and Tobago, their continued investment in Trinidad and Tobago, and future plans, including the restructuring of Atlantic LNG, as discussed, as well as projects that will now be sanctioned for future gas production in Trinidad and Tobago. You will hear more about that in the coming days directly from BP. It was reiterated that BP remains committed to investing in Trinidad and Tobago, and that it would continue to work closely with the government to deliver value for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. As a direct result of government's interventions and discussions, which are still ongoing, close to completion, with the highest level of the BP leadership since 2015, and in particular, the negotiations since 2018, have seen BP investing $7 billion in projects from 2015 to 2022. And our ongoing negotiations yielded $1.2 billion in value-added payments to the Treasury between 2018 to date. So these are the outcomes of the ongoing discussions and negotiations that this team has had with BP starting in 2016 going forward. Importantly, it emphasized that BP should do future fabrication for its Trinidad and Tobago projects in Trinidad and Tobago, and that the government would work with BP and the local industry to make sure that this happens. We also discussed the current gas production challenges and plans for future gas production to sustain current levels, as well as the pathways towards future increased production. With respect to Shell, we met, Trinidad and Tobago delegation met with Shell senior executive leadership in The Hague, and we had in-depth discussions, and these discussions were facilitated at Shell's end with Wael Sawan, the Integrated Gas and Renewables Energy Solutions Director, Cedric Kremers, Executive Vice President LNG, Eugene Oper, who is the Senior Vice President and Country Chair, for Shell Trinidad and Tobago and other Shell executives. Since Shell's return to Trinidad and Tobago with its acquisition of British Gas, the government has worked closely with Shell to ensure its investment in Trinidad and Tobago and its expansion of gas production. Shell, with growing investments in Trinidad and Tobago, is one of the leading and largest players in the global LNG industry. The government's team was provided with an update on Shell's current Trinidad and Tobago natural gas production, which is at its highest level since Shell has re-entered Trinidad and Tobago, and it is currently at 815 million standard cubic feet per day, which is critical and as a direct result of the partnership between the government and Shell and the work that we have done with respect to ensuring that teams deliver fair value, both for Shell and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We discuss future gas production outlook, including Manatee, which will be the largest investment in gas production in Trinidad and Tobago in a decade. Importantly, we also discussed the restructuring of Atlantic LNG and agreed to a new timetable to complete this soon. The restructuring of Atlantic LNG is setting a precedent globally, as this has never been done before. That is, the restructuring of LNG trains between private shareholders and a government. It is expected that when the terms are finally agreed, that Trinidad and Tobago will derive significant benefits in areas like shareholding, structure, and pricing. You will hear more of this in the coming weeks ahead as the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. We also discussed the potential of hydrogen, carbon capture, and sequestration and storage, and an overview of the global gas market with emphasis on LNG. With respect to exploration for oil, we got a commitment from Shell to assist Heritage and the government of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to improve seismic interpretations on the Soldado field so as to bring about improved drilling completions and success as we seek to extract more oil from that proven oil field in the Gulf of Paria. These points I just made are to be taken in the context of a very disturbed global energy market. Prices are relatively good, but prices are very volatile. Production systems around the world are being challenged, and the marketplace is one where certain critical decisions are to be made now. The most critical decisions that we are facing in Trinidad and Tobago are decisions with respect to expenditure on new exploration. There's huge competition for exploration dollars. And if we sit idly by and wait for something to happen in our favor, it is quite possible that certain decisions which are critical to us may not be made in our favor. They may be postponed, shelved, or abandoned completely. In order to prevent that from happening and to ensure that the decisions are made where we are not left out, the trip that we have made is to ensure that those who make those decisions with respect to the companies that are operating in our fields, particularly offshore and in the petrochemical sector, that they make decisions knowing that the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago are anxious for those decisions to be made and that they are made in our favor and not being made with us being on the outside. And it's against that background that I could tell you that I'm very pleased that we are well positioned for a continuation of the investment profiles of these three companies that are critical to the economy and the wherewithal for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, BP, Shell, and Proman. Ladies and gentlemen, not very many of you stopped during the daytime to figure out what is our prospect in the next 5 years or the next 10 years, given our level of expenditure, given the revenues that are required to maintain the standard of living in Trinidad and Tobago. But there's a particular diagram that I gave Minister Young a copy to keep in his briefcase, otherwise I would have brought it here today. It's a diagram that shows what recent productions from recent fields have done with respect to allowing us to produce gas at the level that we're producing now, 2.9 billion cubic feet. And if we do not make the decisions that are to be made now and the investment that are to be made now, the diagram shows that by 2026, 2027, 2028, the levels of gas that would be available in Trinidad and Tobago, if no new improvements are had, will have far-reaching consequences for government revenues and, by, I dare say, for the quality of life of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why we have been working overtime in the last 3 or 4 years, and this year, and the years ahead, to ensure that the projections of that graph are turned around, and it could only be turned around by new investment and successful production from new gas fields. The fields that we are exploiting now, that we know and have in hand, which are producing gas for us now, it is a declining arrangement. With every day you extract 2.9 billion cubic feet, that's 2.9 billion cubic feet less in the field. And of course, it goes to zero in a known time frame. So in order to maintain our earnings, even at the current level, we have to find new sources to add as replacement to sustain our current levels. Very many people in this country are not connected to that reality. But I give you the assurance that the government of Trinidad and Tobago is connected to that reality. And that is why a delegation from this country led by the Prime Minister, including the Minister of Energy, could have and did sit down with those who are able to make those investments and hold out to us the prospect of finding new sources so as to maintain our production levels, our revenue levels, and our standard of living. And I will hold it out to a handful of people in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Do us a favor and not undermine our effort, because that may serve your purpose. It certainly does not serve the purpose of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It is quite disturbing. While we are doing this for all the people of Trinidad and Tobago, a little cabal is out there trying to cast aspersions on people and to spread misinformation. Let me correct the other one. I saw it being said, not being a part of the government, the opposition is not part of these discussions for good reason. But when they tell the country that the visit to Europe is about Trinidad and the Prime Minister going to discuss the sale of methanol shares, I want to make it abundantly clear that no such discussion occurred. It never came up, and it is not part of our discussions. The government owns significant shareholding in a methanol plant, which is run by Proman out in Oman. That did not even come up because that's a settled arrangement. It was not part of our discussions in the context of what I just told you. So the opposition putting that out there is pure mischief. That is not an issue. Secondly, about there was some other, it was about something to do with, it's only what I just told you, nothing else. Disregard everything else you've heard from the opposition, because they have a habit. Every time the government of Trinidad and Tobago goes abroad to conduct business for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, you have this little cabal of opposition people trying to feed into the entity, as they did with the Australians, or into the public domain, that there's something underhand about it. I saw them filing a question in the parliament as to whether or not my delegation traveled on a private jet to Dusseldorf, implying that there's something wrong there. Well, since they're so concerned about how we got to the offices in Düsseldorf to meet our nationals and experts to talk about Trinidad and Tobago's business, I could add for them. We traveled in a Bentley from the airport, and we traveled in a bus in Zurich. And more than that, they gave us lunch and we ate it. So if all of that meant that we are somehow beholding to the company and that we'll do what they did, just forget what they told you and focus on the fact that we are trying to get investments now, commitments now, decisions now, to put us in a position where in 2026, 2027, we will not be out of the life-giving gas for our economy. That's what we're doing. And I'm pleased that we have got very good and positive responses from those who make the decisions with respect to investment in Trinidad and Tobago. With respect to the international community, you've got to bear in mind that there's tremendous pressure now internationally with respect to production in oil and gas and funding and marketplaces and so on. We as a country where the government, not the local private sector, the government is in fact the player in Trinidad and Tobago among these international companies. It is the government's decision that will determine how Trinidad and Tobago comes out of this environment. And we are seeking to make the best of opportunities and to stave off deleterious developments that could harm us in the medium and the long term. I have a slide I want to show you. Not that the other one. Right. This was yesterday's papers. I took this off on a British newspaper on the plane last night. Just to point out to you, that is not only Trinidad and Tobago that's in this situation. It says, new dash for oil as Truss, that's the British Prime Minister, task force targets offshore site. Ministers woo oil and gas giants in bid to speed up growth in the British energy. What that story is that the new Prime Minister in the UK, facing almost the identical situation with Trinidad and Tobago with respect to revenue requirement at the national level, has turned to reopening their effort in oil and gas. And this is a very diversified economy, unlike Trinidad and Tobago, which we are heavily dependent on oil and gas. The British economy is very diversified, but even in that situation, this is the thrust of the new Prime Minister, ensuring that what is happening in the energy sector still provides opportunities for the British government to get itself out of where we find ourselves, is what happens in the months and years ahead with respect to revenues for the country and the supply of energy. And of course, the next slide will show, in another newspaper, fracking power could eclipse North Sea gas. Britain had banned the use of fracking as a technology to extract oil and gas. But because of the dire and complicated disruptive situation now, the ban has been lifted. And the expectation is that notwithstanding what the negatives might be with fracking, fracking is now authorized as a production system in the United Kingdom, and it has the potential to eclipse the production of North Sea gas. And of course, you would know it was North Sea gas that had bailed out the UK decades ago. And there were closures in some of those fields and all kinds of environmental issues. They have now opened them up fully because the international energy circumstances warrant that these things be done. And of course, you would know that there are countries where coal was banned. They are now firing up all their coal plants because winter is ahead. There's war in Europe. There's disruption in the gas market, in the energy market, and in Trinidad and Tobago. We are ensuring that in that market, we produce what we can. We maintain our presence. We maintain our investment levels and increase them in some situations and ensure that we are not left behind in this very disruptive situation. And thankfully, there's a government in Trinidad and Tobago that is aware of these circumstances, are taking corrective action or visionary action, and we regard our involvement through the National Gas Company or as a shareholder in the Oman LNG plant or as a negotiator with respect to shareholding in the LNG business, we regard ourselves as a major player because the people of Trinidad and Tobago are heavily dependent on success in the oil, gas, and petrochemical sectors of our economy. If you have any questions, I'll take them now.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Prime Minister. Shane Scoville from the Newsday newspaper here. Is it possible if you could just kind of give us an idea of what the restructuring of Atlantic LNG looks like as of this moment? What do you think?
What we've been working on is a very novel arrangement. You know, we have 4 LNG plants. Train 1, which is the oldest one, came to the end of its contract life recently and has been shut down, mothballed, largely because there isn't enough gas to run 4 trains. That leaves us with 3 trains. We had a 10% shareholding in train 1. We have no shareholding in train 2. We have no shareholding in train 3. And we have 11% in train 4. So strictly speaking, we only now have 11% in one of the trains. That is our shareholding. But we get revenues from the business of the other 2 trains by virtue of taxes and profits. What we have been doing, we started negotiations with Shell and BP because Shell and BP are the major shareholders in trains 2, trains 3, and train 4. We set about to engage these companies to put a new shareholding arrangement in place where the people of Trinidad and Tobago would own shareholding across the 3 trains. Those discussions are very advanced, and we anticipate that in the not too distant future, we will tell you more definitively what that outcome has been, but we can report that the discussions have gone quite well. The other thing that we have done, what was happening before, was that with respect to the sale of LNG, as you know, these things are benchmarked and priced internationally. Our contracts and our earnings were due on the basis of reference to what is called Henry Hub, which is the pricing point in the United States and the Gulf of Mexico. And while we were stuck there with respect to the price at which our LNG was sold, LNG was being sold in Europe and in Asia, Japan and China for that matter, at much higher prices, from which we were not benefiting because our contracts were Henry Hub. Henry Hub happens to be the lowest of the quoted prices for LNG. And our cargoes were sold by others wherever they get the highest price, and we get paid Henry Hub. I could tell you that our teams, led by Minister Young, we've relentlessly pursued this, and the new arrangements were such that we were not bound only by Henry Hub, but we received benefits based on references to the European price and the Asian price. So the 3 baskets, Asia, Europe, and Henry Hub, now and Brent, the oil price Brent, they form the basis on which we now extract our benefits. And that will account for some of the significant revenues that we have reported and that we will report going forward. We've changed the formula by which the proceeds are apportioned in LNG sales. That has been a very significant, far-reaching success of this government, and it has resulted in its significant increased revenue flows into Trinidad and Tobago. It didn't come about by us breaking any contract. It didn't come about by us threatening anybody. It came about by the government of Trinidad and Tobago leading delegations to the boardrooms of the decision makers and negotiating improved arrangements for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So those are 2 major developments which arose out of our ongoing negotiations, and we do have others that we report in the coming days here.
Good day, Ambika Jagesa Singh from CNC3 News.
Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Ambika Jagesa Singh from CNC3
Ambika.
News. Yeah.
The public wants to know. Tell us loudly.
Ambika Jagesa Singh.
Ambika Jadeja Singh.
Jagesa Singh.
Okay, we got a new one, Peter.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Prime Minister, if I may ask you a question on another topic.
Not yet. If we finish this, we got another topic. Anything else on this matter? As soon as we finish this, we come back to you.
Surrender Campbell, TTT News, about what you spoke about Proman and the making us a hub, a place where the ships can come in and go out from this basis. Could you speak to us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, well, there's the whole world now is striving for clean energy. And we happen to be a producer of one of the cleanest, which is methanol. We are a major producer and exporter of methanol. Proman has led the charge, again out of Trinidad and Tobago, in using methanol as a fuel for ocean-going vessels to replace bunker fuel, which one may regard as dirty fuel. Bunker fuel is the heavy part of the oil that, when you take out gasoline, diesel, and so on, and that the bunker fuel is the typical fuel used for ocean-going ships. It is viewed as dirty. So if you use methanol, you'll be burning a clean fuel, and that will contribute to the world's response to climate change. So the government is encouraging Proman to promote methanol as a fuel, which ocean-going ships can use. It is now demonstrated. There are brand new ships now being built for that purpose, one of which would be christened in Trinidad here in the coming weeks. And we're holding that out to the world, especially those vessels that come through the Panama Canal, going across the Atlantic to Asia, into the South Atlantic. Trinidad and Tobago is located ideally on that route with a supply of clean fuel. So what we're trying to do is to establish ourselves as a place for refueling with clean fuel. So our methanol, instead of going elsewhere to be used by others, if we generate this business here of clean fuel bunkering, then it holds out the prospect of great promise of things that can happen in Trinidad and Tobago. Because once we establish that as a major fueling point, then with all these ships coming to us, some would need repairs, some would need servicing, right? And those are businesses that would grow once we manage to establish ourselves internationally as a major refueling point based on our supply of methanol, which is produced here in Trinidad and Tobago.
The meeting with the Proman executives, is it possible if you could go into a little bit more detail as to what the investment opportunities discussed were, if there was a dollar value placed it in any way?
I wouldn't want to do that at this stage. I would leave that for the company to do going forward, except to say that we are satisfied that we are not being left behind or left out. And on the contrary, we in Trinidad and Tobago are at the forefront of investments being made by this company, which has these kind of far-reaching consequences.
I also saw it was reported that NGC, has successfully consolidated a gas contract with the Point Vistas Industrial Estate. Just wanted to know if there was any details available in contract period, contract gas price. You could probably tell us a little bit more about.
Again, maybe I could ask Minister Young to speak there. 2 words, not too many. As you may recall, we had some serious challenges with respect to gas contracts, which had expired. And we were even at the point where some companies had been closing their doors, and all part of the negotiation strategies. We've made considerable progress there, and maybe you can say a few words without going too far at this stage.
Thank you, Prime Minister. NGC has successfully concluded all of their gas supply contracts that they've been negotiating over the past few years. You all will hear more to come. They have very good news, which was confirmed with the Prime Minister's visit to London, that will also be broadcast very shortly, that gives us another lifeline in the gas sector. But NGC has done what they've done. You all heard their recent results, Prime Minister, of very good profits declared, and more will be said at the appropriate time in the not too distant future. But all the gas contracts have been successfully negotiated, and in particular with the Proman Group, where you all know we were having some difficulty not in the not too distant past.
Thank you very much, Minister Young. And let me just say something else with respect to this whole question of oil and gas and energy security. As you may recall, recently we had the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, and the CARICOM delegation met with the President of the United States with respect to the same kind of matters I was talking about here. It's come under the rubric of energy security for the Caribbean. And the President of the United States asked that a team be put together under the chairmanship of the Vice President to deal with energy security for the Caribbean alongside finance and agriculture. And this is co-chaired by the United States and Trinidad and Tobago. That development has resulted in a number of important technical meetings that have been going on and reporting back. And the Vice President has called a meeting of the co-chairs on Thursday. So I travel to Washington on Tuesday, which is tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow I go to Washington for two reasons. You will also recall, if you check your diaries, that in 2019, I led a CARICOM delegation to the United States Congress on the troubling issue of the banking sector facing de-risking and loss of correspondent banking, meaning that our Caribbean banks were being cut off from international banks for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that the international banks were saying that they didn't want to carry the risk associated with shortcomings in our banking systems, which could have penalties for the international banks. If we don't have corresponding banking, it means that you can't put a check in a bank here and have it cleared by another bank abroad and so on. So that was very, very serious for us in CARICOM. And that delegation in 2019, we met with the chairman of the U.S. Banking Committee in the Congress there, Congresswoman Maxine Waters. She was very helpful to us in opening doors for us and having our complaints being listened to. And then she led a delegation to Barbados a few months ago, which I attended, and we met in Barbados with CARICOM heads and the team from the United States Congress. And following up from that, there are hearings on Thursday morning. On Wednesday morning, there are hearings led by Congresswoman Maxine Waters and her Committee on Financing to treat with this matter, which CARICOM had raised in 2019 and which had been a major agenda item at CARICOM as a government meeting. So now we finally got where we want to be, which is to be heard by banks in front of the United States Congress. So I'm going up there for that. That delegation is being led by Prime Minister Motley, who is the co-chair on the finance side. But the CARICOM would have a very significant presence while these hearings go on. That's on Wednesday, and on Thursday there's the energy meeting, and I take that too, and then I'm back on the weekend. I stop off in New York to see my new grandchild. I hope that doesn't upset too many people, but wish me well. Thank you very much. Yes, you said there was something else you wanted to raise.
If I may ask about the Library Shipyard first, will that be coming on stream and where the project is? And also, what is the financial outlook for these projects and will it be an avenue of diversification?
Okay, the Library dry dock is still a matter in its infancy. We're doing the feasibility work has gone on. It is still something that we want to do. The principals are still on board, but what gives it a much better chance now is the fact that if we do become a refueling port, as we are advancing very quickly to, it makes it far more feasible to operate dry docking facilities in Trinidad and Tobago. So we are confident now that somewhere along the way, the investment decision of the Library dry dock is likely to be made. And in fact, with improved partnership. As it stands, initially it was Chinese interests and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. As we advance these thoughts that I've just raised with you, other interests are being shown because the government doesn't really want to be the main mover and driver in this. The more we get from the private sector and commitments from people with ships, the more feasible does dry docking in Trinidad and Tobago loom on the horizon as a major investment possibility. So we're still there, but not yet at the investment stage with numbers at this stage.
Question now. I'm sure you've heard about the brewing issue in Tobago. Any comments on the Duke and Folly situation, and are you concerned for the governance of the island
Tobago?
itself? Yeah.
No. Why would I be concerned about other people's political agendas as long as they stay within the laws of Trinidad and Tobago? It's still a free country. But the second part of your question is yes, to the extent that any of these developments negatively impact on the ability of public officers to discharge their duties, then the government has an interest in ensuring that we keep an eye on that.
Just to go back to the negotiations that you would have attended in Europe, just wanted to know, for the sake of clarity, for the lay person, every person in the street, is there any short or long-term employment may be generated from these projects they may be able to look forward to?
Well, let's put it this way. All of these investments will require people to carry them out. And I mentioned to you the commitment to have construction based in Trinidad and Tobago for any of the facilities that will arise once the investment is made. You know what that means. That means jobs, good quality jobs. Every platform we build here, every jacket we build, on the top side, otherwise, these are opportunities. So while we don't speak specifically about a specific job, capital always needs labor to deliver on its promise. Okay? Thank you all very much. We have one more question. Okay, she has one more question. New lady has one last question.
We're also hearing that the Prime Minister of Barbados is going to the IMF. Is that a cause of concern for us?
No. Barbados has been in an IMF program. It's not that she's going to the IMF. Barbados is in an IMF program, and the program outlines pathways and milestones. And I think Barbados has done quite well in that first program in meeting the milestone. There's no disaster in going to the IMF if you end up requiring IMF assistance. That is what the IMF is for. But when you go to the IMF to get the assistance, the IMF usually lays down some very stringent conditions. So if you want to avoid those conditions being applied to you, you tend to avoid the IMF. But once you are in the program, Jamaica is in an IMF program. In Trinidad and Tobago's case, the government of Trinidad and Tobago took the position that we, even though we had similar difficulties, we will not use the IMF as our way out. We will make our own decisions and apply our own medicine so as to have the flexibility of doing it the way we would like to do it and not have the pain of IMF impositions upon us. That is what has happened in Trinidad and Tobago. You would have heard some of the experts telling us, well, if we didn't do that, what's going to happen to our foreign exchange? It's going to run out, and la, 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 la. That has not happened. And we have been making adjustments. Of course, when we do that, we are accused of all kinds of things. But the bottom line is that those have been national decisions made by us in the context of our own circumstances without being dictated to us by the IMF on their terms. And we have done that quite successfully. And I dare say we are well away from any access to the IMF as a lender of last resort.
Some travels also is the Queen's funeral. Any plans to go to the Queen's funeral or an envoy?
Me?
Yeah.
No. Our president will represent the country at the funeral. Arrangements are in place for the president of Trinidad and Tobago to attend the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. So that's being handled by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the President's Office, and you will get more information in the very near future.
We have the time. Recently, the chairman of the Commission of Inquiry into the deaths of the divers would have come in the public domain and made certain remarks over concerns over a lack of resources and so on. I don't know if you're aware or if there's anything.
I wouldn't pay attention to that at this press conference this morning. Those are administrative matters which I'm sure there are enough people on the government payroll to ensure that that doesn't happen. Thank you very much.